In the orchard of Jeju, Eugene and Han circled each other for weeks, teasing, arguing, hiding more than they said, until one night, a fall into the grass, a kiss that left no room for doubt, and the quiet confession they both been holding back. They had found each other, and in the hush that followed, the orchard seemed to breathe with them. The tangerines hung heavy on their branches. Days unfolded in the rhythms they didn't rush to change, and nights that ended closer than they began. But somewhere beneath the warmth, both of them knew this couldn't last forever. This is Beneath the Tangerine Trees, Chapter 5, 1 month to Sunrise. The orchard didn't look different. Same rows, same trees, same cool breath of morning air rolling in from the sea. But the way they moved in it, that had changed. It wasn't the kind of shift anyone would notice at first. Not unless you were watching closely. Not unless you've been here before the fall, before the kiss. Han was already in the row Eugene had started, sleeves rolled neatly, his shoulders shifting with each lift of a crate. Eugene slowed without meaning to. You're going to wreck your back lifting them like that. Han glanced over his shoulder, smirk small but certain. Worried about me? Eugene plucked a tangerine, turning it in his hand before dropping it into his crate. Worried about having to explain why you're suddenly useless. They worked without hurrying, Eugene reaching high, Han crouching low, crates filling between them. Every so often their hands brushed when passing fruits across. Neither pulled away. At the end of the row, they stopped to swap out full crates for empties. Footstep crunch on the dirt path. Eugene's father appeared at the turn of the row, a cap pulled low, gloves tucked in his back pocket. He paused, looking between them, not long, but long enough. Getting along better these days? He said it simply, but his eyes lingered on Eugene's a fraction longer before moving past them to the next row. Boots crunching, no more words. Eugene reached for another tangerine, but when he glanced up, Han was watching him. Han gave the smallest wink. Eugene shook his head, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. The silence between them carried more now, and neither of them seemed in a hurry to put it down. They kept moving down the next row, side by side now, their steps falling into the same rhythm. The orchard already knew, and maybe so did Eugene's father. The orchard rested when the rain moved in. Just a house that sounded larger than usual, and the morning that didn't insist on hurry. Han rolled his sleeves and began setting ingredients on the counter in neat rows. Flour, sugar, eggs, butter. Eugene stood in the doorway, hair still damp from a quick rinse, watching the small, careful odor take shape. Measure in grams, Han said, not looking up. Eugene stepped closer, the window fogging slightly with kitchen heat. The scent arrived before the cool did, sharp sweet citrus rising through the room, warming the edges of the rain. Han worked by feel and fraction. Eugene learned by watching how the butter disappeared into the flour, how zest lifted the bowl when it should have made it heavy, how quiet made the kitchen larger. He asked, not loudly, why Han kept doing this. Han didn't answer with numbers. He said almost in passing that one day he wanted to open a dessert shop, something small, maybe built around tangerine. The words were light, but they stayed, and Eugene found himself picturing it before he could stop. The air carrying citrus and sugar, the front window glowing in light, Han behind the counter dusted with flour. It wasn't much, just an image, but it felt like it belonged somewhere. Han didn't say the rest until the crust went into the tin. The tart took the oven like it belonged there. While it baked, the kitchen held there quite easily. Spoons tapped dry, a cup set down. When the timer gave it small permission, Han cut a slice before the glaze could decide to shine or settle. The scent rose quick and bright against the rain. "You taste first," Eugene said, voice low enough to blur into the kitchen hum. "I'm not throwing up again." Han's shoulders shook once in a silent laugh. Then he gave a quick overdone gagging. Eugene's eyes narrowed, but the faintest smile pulled through. Footsteps crossed the hall. Eugene's father appeared in the doorway. Without a word, he picked up the fork, took a bite, and set it back down. "You good?" he said simply. Han's eyes found Eugene's. A small, slow mousing of, "See, I'm good." Eugene's father didn't leave right away. His eyes moved once between them again, unreadable, before landing on the window where the rain had begun to thin. "I've got to head out near Seongsan tomorrow," he said after a moment. "If you boys need a ride, I can drop you guys off early." The words were casual, but they carried more weight than they needed to. Then he turned and left, the sound of his boots fading down the hall. Eugene only smoothed the edge of the plate with one fingertip. Han's smile stayed, but his voice softened. "Do you think he knows?" Eugene didn't look up. "He knows the orchard." Outside, the rain softened. Inside, the kitchen kept its warmth, a little longer than it needed to. Next early morning, the world outside was still somewhere between night and day. Eugene's father was already behind the wheel, a thermos balanced against his knee. Han slid into the back seat with a quiet, "Morning." Eugene took the passenger side. Eugene's father glanced once in the mirror, then back to the road. By the time they reached the eastern side of the island, the air had changed. They stepped out into the cold, their breaths moving ahead of them. Tourists came for the sunrise. Fishermen came to read the weather from its shadow. This morning, it was just theirs. "I'll be back in 2 hours," Eugene's father said, and drove off without waiting for an answer. They stood for a moment, watching the taillights fade into the curve of the road. Then Han tilted his head toward the rise. "Well," he said, voice low and amused, "you wanted a date." Eugene didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth gave him away. The climb began slow, the sea falling in and out of view between the railings. Every turn brought a wider reach of horizon. Han moved easily, stopping only when Eugene slowed, nearly saying, "Hurry," but somehow setting a pace that kept them together. By the time they reached the top, the light had found them, warm against chilled skin. Han stood a little ahead, his hair lifting in the wind, the early sun pulling gold out of his profile. Eugene watched him longer than the view. "I only have less than a month now." Han didn't turn, but his shoulders shifted, the kind of movement that wasn't from the wind. "I know," he said quietly. Then after a beat that might have been a held breath, 23 days. The number sat between them like something placed carefully on the rail, not heavy enough to break it, not light enough to ignore. Eugene let out a short, dry breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You counted?" Han finally looked over, eyes steady in the light. "I started counting the day you got the letter." Neither of them moved to close the space, but the air between did something different now. Tighter, warmer, the kind that made leaving harder to imagine. They stayed there until the sun climbed higher, until the boats below had turned from silhouettes to color, until the quiet felt like it had said what it needed to. On the way down, they passed a small group just starting their climb. Bright jackets, cameras ready. The kind of early ambition tourists wore. Han nodded to them, then glanced at Eugene. Funny thing, he said. Some people come here just once, like it's a box to check. And you? Eugene asked. I think you come here when you wanted to remember something. Eugene looked ahead at the trail, the sunlight pulling gold out of the wet railings. 23 days is a lot of time, Han said. We could make a lot of memories. Eugene's mouth curved. Then we better start. That night, the house had the kind of silence that remembers the day, but doesn't repeat it. Eugene sat at the desk, chair angled half toward the bed. A book rested face down across his thigh, spine tilted like it might slip if he forgot about it. A tangerine sat near his elbow, skin dull now, but still holding something of the morning's warmth. On the floor bed, Han lay crosswise, head toward the foot, quilt twisted under his shoulder, one knee bent, his heel hooked lightly over the mattress. His hand reached for the nightstand drawer, sliding it open with the careful sound of not waking anyone. From it, he pulled a folded scrap of paper and a pencil. Then he started writing, one word, a pause. We should make a list, Han said, for all the things we can do before you go. The pencil kept moving, small block letters filling uneven lines. Jog every morning, kiss before sleep, bake once more before the season ends, see the lonely rock, learn to make each other's favorite drink. One day without our phones, get lost on purpose, eat something neither of us can pronounce. Eugene leaned an arm on the desk. Maybe check out nearby dessert shops? You could study them. Han looked up, a quiet thank you in his eyes, but shook his head. That's for my list. This, he tapped the paper, is for yours. The next lines curved toward mischief. Shower together. Sleep in until noon at least once. Make a tart at midnight and eat the whole thing. Dance in the kitchen with no music. Swap shirts for a day. By the time Han set the pencil down, the list had shifted from tidy columns to a little cluster of thoughts. He printed one last line in a thicker strokes. Make love. 2 firm underlines. Then in small letters just below, tonight. He glanced out from the page, the pencil still resting between his fingers. His gaze met Eugene's, holding just a moment longer than necessary, the kind of look that carried its own dare. A faint tilt of his head. And Han said, every day? Eugene's hand moved without thinking, flicking the nearest pillow across the short distance. It landed against Han's shoulder with a soft thud. Han's grin widened. The pencil moved again, adding 3 quick words under the last line, much as we can. Eugene shook his head, but the small crease at the corner of his mouth gave him away. Neither of them reached for the paper again. The list stayed where it was. Han shifted first, pushing himself upright, the quilt folding in soft waves behind him. He didn't rush, just crossed the short space until Eugene had no reason to stay seated. When Eugene stood, the chair turned a fraction more toward the desk, as if covering for them. The list lost its place on the bed, slipping down to the floor. The words waited there, folded in the night. You've been listening to Beneath the Tangerine Trees, Chapter 5, 1 Month to Sunrise. If you've been following Eugene and Han's story, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. You can find more episodes and other stories right here on the channel. And if this one stayed with you, leave a like, and share it with someone who could use a little citrus on their day. Thanks for listening.
Not a promise,